Hi, I'm Steve Plate. Welcome to this edition of Voices from the Village. Traditionally, over the years on Voices, we've done very issues-oriented shows. They talked about some of the more challenging things that face Santa Cruz and a good deal of seriousness and knowledgeable conversation about issues that are really important to the people in Santa Cruz. But tonight we have an opportunity to kind of look at the folks kind of behind the issues and get to know some folks that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, known and grown to respect, who have been intimately involved in a lot of the social justice actions that have happened here in Santa Cruz. They've really become part and the heart and soul, in my opinion, of the Santa Cruz activist community. Welcome, Louise Drummond. Louise, welcome.
Well, thank you very much.
And Rabbi Phil Posner. Rabbi, the good rabbi, as I call you, welcome.
Thanks.
Rabbi, you and I and Louise have been involved with the Freedom Sleepers over time. I know that when we first started that action, you and Louise were two of the first folks that actually got tickets, for sleeping out in city parks, which is the City Hall is considered in support of people experiencing homelessness. Give us a little bit of your background, and we'll talk about the Freedom Riders later. We really want to hear about that. But kind of when you came to Santa Cruz, how you got involved with advocacy for people experiencing homelessness.
Well, basically, I was riding my bike a lot on the bike paths and seeing a lot of homeless people when I first got here. We moved here about a year and a half ago.
Okay, yeah.
And I just felt a sense of frustration, anger, and empathy for the position of homeless people in Santa Cruz, and then began to start doing some things like volunteering to serve food at Food Not Bombs, etc. And then one day, Abby and I think Robert were
Abby Samuels, Keith McHenry, and Robert Norris,
we're talking together at after Food Not Bombs, and I said, we need to be doing something. We need to, etc. So that started a group which ultimately came to be called the Freedom Sleepers. And Louise has been very involved in it.
Yeah. And before we go to Louise, it's interesting to mention you're talking about riding your bike, as Micah, your son and stepson, will be joining us in a few moments. He, a former director of
People
Power, now Santa Cruz, Bike Santa Cruz. So we'll be talking a little bit about bike transportation and that. So Louise, you've become somebody who is always there when it comes to advocating for people experiencing homelessness, and not only that, but also for women's rights in general. How did you kind of come to this when yourself and Phil came into Santa Cruz?
Well, I was also riding the levee.
Oh, okay.
And seeing people and imagining that they were extremely uncomfortable because they had nowhere to go, really. And certainly no place to sleep that was comfortable and safe. And when Phil asked me about helping out, I was so willing, because it had seemed to me for a while that I had to find something to do about it, and I was more than willing to go into confrontation in order to put some pressure on the city council, because it's their law that is so punishing to people who don't have homes.
And it's interesting that when we talk about the Freedom Sleepers, and of course we began the sleepouts at City Hall on July 4th, and you and Phil were amongst the first people who were sleeping out in sleeping bags, and amongst the first people who got tickets, refusing to leave when the police came and challenged your right to be there.
Right.
So this is, hold on now, and I believe that's probably your son, perhaps the front door. So if we can get somebody to go answer our front door, I think we're going to have Micah Posner with us. But I was struck by how determined both you and Phil were. And I think that when people look at activism in Santa Cruz, a lot of times they'll look at kind of the same people who are involved in the same things. But here were two people, new to Santa Cruz, really making a commitment to people experiencing homelessness and refusing absolutely refusing to leave, and subsequently cited. And you recently had your court case, in fact, that went.
Well, for me too, what's been exciting is that all my life I've been a social activist, but I've never had a partner who was really a social activist the way Louise is. So, between having Louise as a social activist and having a son who's a city councilman, I thought, my God, I really love this community. So it's been really super to have Louise involved.
And I think right now we want to play just a short video we have about homelessness while we welcome Micah Posner to the panel, and then we'll come right back and we'll talk a bit with Micah.
You ask the question, how many people homeless you think are in Santa Cruz? I think you can fill the boardwalk, in one end of the boardwalk to the other end of the boardwalk with homeless people in Santa Cruz. My name is Sparky. That's what they call me here on the street in Santa Cruz. 22 years old, 6 foot, 180 pounds, and I am a houseless traveler. That's what I like to call myself. I was a heroin addict, and opiates you depend on them. You get sick, really sick. And I'd get up every day, even sick or not, and I'd look people in the eyes and I'd ask them for $1 over and over again, and it's the worst feeling in the world. I didn't like doing it. I had to do it because I didn't like the other homeless people that would come up to me and ask me to get them or support their habit and just be lazy. Every time I see them, can you get me high? Can you get me high? Can you get me high? And here, if you got money, you're looked upon, you're a good citizen because you're shopping on Pacific. If you don't have money and you're asking for a little change to get something to eat on Pacific, you're categorized as a worthless homeless bum who should get a job or either deserves to be thrown in jail because you're asking for 50 cents. Some homeless people are bad though. I'll let you know, some homeless people are dirtbags. I don't like a lot of homeless people. I don't like myself sometimes. I wake up, I tell myself, okay, I'm homeless still, you mean? I can either look at the life sucking, the day sucking, it's gonna suck, or I get out there, try to make a couple bucks, get some food in my stomach, go do things I need to do, like go apply for SSI, go look for work, go to a couple NA meetings, or I can go back to the park, San Lorenzo, go to the bathroom, get high, and be around a bunch of dirtbags who really don't care about me, who tell me they're my friend, but at the end of the day would rob me blind if I wasn't looking. I'd take it and be happy with it. Minimum wage job, a nice room to rent, I can rent, so I have a roof over my head, and a good connection with my brother and my sisters again. Good be on good graces with them, and a better and having a good understanding with a higher power of my own choosing.
So I'm Janet Thomas. I'm the Executive Director of the Homeless Services Center, and the Homeless Services Center's mission is to really end homelessness here in Santa Cruz County. So all of our programs are using what we call a housing first philosophy, which is a way of working with folks that gets them first into their housing and then helps them with all of the other things they might need from there.
I know a lot of people that have jobs that are still homeless.
And of course, that was Janet Thomas, former director of Homeless Services Center, and one of the folks who, what they call the 6% on Pacific Avenue, the people who are homeless, transient, just kind of make it through day to day. We welcome Micah Posner to the panel. Micah, my good friend and city council member, welcome to you. He's beaming. I was telling the audience as we started the show that oftentimes here on Voices we talk about very serious issues. We're talking about things that are challenging in the city, but tonight was an opportunity to really get to know some of the people behind the issues on a personal level. I know you and I campaigned together in 2012. You were successful as city council, and prior to that you were director of People Power, and now Bike Santa Cruz. So you have a very strong interest in that, but you've also been a very strong proponent of people's right to sleep, a place to sleep, as a council member.
Yeah, well, I learned about activism as a child from my dad, the Freedom Rider.
Yeah, which will be really interesting to find out much more about.
Yeah, we may disagree on tactics sometimes or whatever, but as far as values go, I mean, I definitely have a strong background in human rights and civil rights, and the right to sleep is pretty high up there.
Yeah.
Just before you came, I mentioned the fact that how exciting it is to have a partner who's a social activist And then at times when I'm sitting at meetings with you, you know, I feel really pretty lucky to be your dad and be involved with you and helping make Santa Cruz a better community. So.
Well, I feel lucky when you two are at the council meetings. So it's
Well, it's a, you know, it's a terrific tradition in Santa Cruz, you know, to have, you know, family members be so intimately and vitally involved in the challenges the city faces, and it's striking to me when I go to council, see Micah sitting up in the dais, a council member, but you and Louise are always there, and of course, you are there at all of the various different events and actions that we have in support of people experiencing homelessness and generally the working poor. But Louise, also, you've been very active recently in applying for the Commission for the Prevention of Violence Against Women. I know that's a real interest area for you.
Right. As a woman, of course, I have to be very interested in women's issues. I mean, I've been very lucky all of my life, and have only worked when I wanted to. And have lived a very good life, but I have seen my grandmother and my mother and myself in our own ways suffer a lot because of sexism, and I feel the same compassion for other women that I might feel for the women of my own family.
Yep. Well, I think that's interesting that sometimes people in Santa Cruz will become identified with one particular issue. And they're marginalized in terms of other issues that are important to them. So I'm really delighted to see that you're taking not only an interest in women's rights, but also going to council, wanting to be appointed to. It's unfortunate that we don't have direct appointments to these commissions anymore. But
we do actually for this particular commission.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
It's the only one, the Commission for Prevention of Violence Against Women. It's Dawn Lane's appointment. Right
Okay.
now.
Which is one of the more effective and one of the better staffed and funded commissions for the city, but they do tremendous, tremendous work. So let me talk about now maybe your reflections, Micah, what it was like being the son of a freedom rider. But Phil, tell us about your freedom rider days, because that's just fascinating to everybody. And you know, really, as a tribute to that, is why we named it the Freedom Sweepers. I know that you weren't comfortable with that to begin with, but people have so much respect for that, and I think it's something that we all kind of want to know a little more about.
Well, so in 1961, I was one of 16 students from UCLA that went to New Orleans and then took a train from New Orleans to Jackson, Mississippi. We were arrested in a train terminal, not a bus terminal, but at the reunion a few years ago, they gave us this as a commemoration of the Freedom Rides.
I'll be darned.
So, and then,
You can put
so
that
I brought that,
Yeah.
and then I think it was last year, UCLA recognized us LA Freedom Riders. So what we basically did was we took the train from New Orleans to Jackson. We sat in, black and white together, and you know, I sing that song, we shall not be moved.
Absolutely,
Sheriff, a guy named Sheriff Tyson said, "Y'all gonna move?" He said it 3 times. We refused to move, and in fact, we were singing, we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted. So then after that, for not moving, I spent 39 days in the penitentiary in Mississippi, in a place called Parchman Penitentiary. So that's basically my Freedom Rider experience. It was a big part of my life. I was a rabbinic student already, and it certainly motivated my continuous involvement in issues having to do with civil rights.
And you, for 40 years or more, have been a congregational rabbi, is that right?
I was a congregational rabbi for 38 years, but I'm still doing some congregational work as well. And as a matter of fact, down there, I think, is a portrait, a beautiful painting that was done for me on my 10th anniversary when I was a rabbi in Riverside, that reflects my prophetic motivation for being involved in helping humanity. That is a painting that was done by an artist named Marty Tobias. When he asked me what theme he wanted me to paint, I said, well, my favorite prophet is the prophet Amos. And Amos in chapter 6 says, I don't want your sacrifices and your offerings. Just let righteousness flow down like a mighty stream. So as you can see in that painting, Marty did a beautiful job of letting that water of righteousness flood out the ritual. So when people ask me, well, what's part of the motivation for you of being involved in civil rights and social activism, I definitely was influenced by our wonderful Jewish prophets, and particularly the prophet Amos.
Interesting. And Mike, coming from such a strong tradition of activism, I know that you and I have known one another for a few years, and I knew of your work with People Power. And in fact, I can recall very vividly when I was going to run for City Council in 2012, seeing you on the bridge that goes over the levee to the courthouse, and you were saying, I'm going to run for City Council. And you were talking about running for City Council. It was the first time that I'd ever gotten any idea about your interest in serving in city government. And you ran such a powerful, well-organized campaign. But to what extent does having your father be a freedom rider have influenced you in your activism over time in Santa Cruz?
Well, it was a huge impact from when I was a kid. I mean, he named me after a prophet, for one thing. Sometimes my mom would complain, like, aren't you going to get a professional job or whatever? I'd say, Mom, you named me after a prophet. Like, what do you expect, So, I've always felt like in my professional life that I should spend it trying to help people reach our communal values, whatever they are. I mean, hopefully our communal values are about justice and compassion and care for the environment. So I just always felt like that's what I should act out. I grew up, my father's son, thinking I needed to deal with the worst problems that were in front of me, and I grew up in the eastern part of LA that was full of smog and smoke and development and
I didn't know that.
And the dislocation caused by cars.
Riverside.
Yeah, in Riverside. So I think subconsciously I was thinking, what problem am I going to try to solve? So I thought, oh, the cars. So I started working on that in Santa Cruz. But the more council meetings I went to and the more success I had as a bicycle advocate, the more I wanted to work on a wider array of subjects. So I got that wish.
Yes, you did. And now we're coming on to 2016 again. Well, you'll have another opportunity to convince the voters of Santa Cruz that they want you to represent them, and I think that would be a fine choice because as I look back over the last 3 years, and maybe you could talk about it just a little bit, how has that period for you been as a council member? What issues surprised you that were so strong and active in the community, and what issues that may not have really risen to the surface that you think should have?
Yeah, it has been hard. Things have been, I'm willing to be outvoted on the council, which not all council members are, and so those things always stick in your brain. When you're there's so many times I look back at it, it's like 80 or 90% of the time we find consensus somehow. So like for example on the accountability program downtown, which is a way to deal with nuisance crimes without throwing people in jail. So that's an example of a program. I was just thinking about it. Where we all agreed and we came to consensus, or a lot of our environmental stuff, like the green lanes that went in, it was unanimous on the council. And the rail trail was unanimous. I led it, and I'm really proud of that, but I was completely supported by my colleagues, so that was great. And actually on this Thursday at the Police Community Room, the city's going to unveil our plans for the segment of rail trail in the city. So this is literally a dream come true for me. It's not as important a dream as Dr. Martin Luther King, but it's my little dream to have a path that runs through town for people to walk around.
You were kind enough to be here with us this evening, so we do have a clip, the rail trail, talking about it. So let's run that while we take a small break, and we can take a look at the progress that's being made. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and then we can get back to some other kind of social issues in town.
The Monterey Bay Sanctuary Scenic Trail, or MBSST, is the project name for a concept that for over a decade has been referred to as the rail trail. When most people think of the rail trail, they envision a multi-use bicycle and pedestrian path running in the rail corridor and using the existing bridges and trestles. This idea is known as a rail-to-trail conversion. However, the Regional Transportation Commission's proposed design concept for the rail trail is to divide the corridor with a fence and to keep a single-track railroad operational. This requires that most of the existing bridges and trestles, 23 in total, will have to be duplicated for the bicycle and pedestrian trail. Current estimates are that this alone will add upwards of $60 million to the project, a huge sum considering that the entire corridor cost only $14.2 million to purchase. The argument for keeping the railroad is that if it were used for passenger service, it could provide needed relief to freeway congestion and offer viable transportation alternatives. But can it, and at what cost? The RTC has recently released a passenger rail feasibility study that attempts to make this case. The problem is that the numbers are questionable and the assumptions flawed. The bottom line is that developing passenger rail service will take 20 years and is likely to cost upwards of $600 million. Even then, it may have little or no impact on freeway congestion. Simply put, it doesn't solve our biggest transportation problems. Worse, it will require a subsidy of $12 million a year to operate. The reality is that the rail with trail concept impacts the
The Monterey Bay has become a world destination site, but what we haven't done is made all of that scenery accessible. And I think once you make that scenery accessible, you provide economic opportunity for job development.
This is a system we've been working on for many years. It took us a long time to get to acquiring the tracks and the right-of-way through the county, and we have got to put it to good use for the benefit as many people in Santa Cruz County as we can.
By building the rail trail, we can give tourists and citizens the opportunity to view one of the most perfect areas and protected areas of the California coastline on a daily basis in a safe way and in a way that allows the small businesses on our north coast to really thrive.
There are lots of communities all over the world who are benefiting from a rail trail system. Here's an example of one in California.
I initiated this project back in 1998 in San Clemente, and we've done surveys with the Recreation Department, and it is the #1 recreational amenity in San Clemente.
The best thing that ever happened to our community is that trail. It's created an opportunity for people to recreate, to exercise, to meet. The difference between before and after the trail was built is amazing.
It's been a very effective tool bringing people together in San Clemente, not only as an economic engine, to support the economic engine to the city, but bringing physical fitness to the forefront in the community.
If you come out to parts of the rail trail we've already built, you could see school kids out here. The more people walk, the more people get fresh air, the more people move, the better we can do in terms of creating better, healthy outcomes in our community.
There's two projects that I know that I've worked on personally, and that's the Arona Gulch project. It just never made sense to me why they never put a trail in there until just recently. Everyone loves it now, and it makes a safe, easy corridor to get from point A to point B.
It's amazing. I've heard people from all over the county talk about how not only they love the path, they love the access, but how it really shows a model for the kinds of pedestrian and bike corridors that they can create in their communities. It's really a model for the whole county.
Having a multimodal transportation facility through the heart of the county like it is, it opens up lots and lots of options for tourism, for recreation, for transportation. Really some exciting possibilities.
I know the California trail system would love to have a coastal trail all the way from the Oregon border to the Mexican border. Maybe someday it can be achieved, but we've done our little piece, and hopefully other communities will do the same.
The best thing that ever happened to our community is that trail. Now they can walk on an all-purpose, year-round trail. The difference is remarkable.
I think collectively in my 40 years of elective office, I don't think there's any economic development we've ever done around here that will be more popular and more successful than this trail. It'll be the biggest thing we've ever done.
Santa Cruz is such a beautiful place to live. It's perfect for a rail trail. My generation will be thanking you for years to come.
So as we strive to be eminently fair and present both sides of a question here on Voices from the Village, Councilmember Posner was almost out of his seat when the first, but you know, I think I
was grabbing for that.
I think the wiser wags, the people who really appreciate what the rail trail can do, you know, are now really getting a lot of traction with this.
I mean, the rail trail has been really accepted. I'm really grateful for that. I mean, we have a great plan for it that the Regional Transportation Commission put together. It's won awards and everything. The first video you showed was by activists who do support the trail, but they want to rip out the tracks and not have a train.
Oh, okay.
So that's our next issue. You know, I'm really proud. We got together. We bought that corridor.
Right.
We're building the trail literally as we speak. They're designing it. The funding's in. Which to me is like, why would we rip up the tracks? You know, we're winning. We're actually building the trail.
Yeah.
But you know, some people, they don't want a train, so they're trying to fight it in that way. And so that will be our next debate. You know, we agreed on buying the corridor, we beat on the trail, and now we got to work for a train.
And
so.
I have to laugh. We did a show, I don't know how long ago it was. It might have been a BTS Presents show where there was a fellow on who had the same point of view as the first video, and then you and he were kind of sitting there going back and forth. But still, even though there was a lot of disagreement about, you know, what kind of proposal you're going to pursue, the idea of a rail trail appeals to everyone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's great. You know, you got to stop and say, cool, we got consensus on this.
Yeah.
Now, those of us that worked for the rail trail for 10 or 20 years and helped buy the corridor, we always imagined a train as well. Now there's a splinter group that wants to do trail without the train. So, you know, they're welcome to that opinion, and I think it's foolish. But, you know, we'll keep talking about it over the next few years and hopefully end up with a great train system in addition to the rail trail, which was the original plan.
And certainly that's just another example of an issue in town that you have become identified with and out in front of, you know, and that's really reflects to me the social activism of the Posners as a family, you know, and the influence they have on Santa Cruz. Louisa, I wanted to get back and talk about, we just had our ACLU banquet today and an award ceremony, and one of the awards, the Hammer of Justice, was given to Willow Katz. And, you know, Willow is a member of the statewide consolidated action to abolish solitary confinement, of which there is an event the 23rd of every month. You were out there yesterday with us, and you are a very strong proponent of abolishing solitary confinement and the torture that this represents.
Yes, I am, because of course I feel that it's morally unacceptable to torture people, and solitary confinement is torture. And not only that, in Pelican Bay, the guards are now practicing sleep deprivation by going through and making terrible noises on all of the cells every half hour, waking the prisoners up. And
Well, they've probably been doing that for a long time.
well, they may have been. In any case, even if I didn't feel compassion for the prisoners, treating them like this creates a plague on the rest of society, because people get out of prison terribly damaged. And it's not just the adults that they're doing that to, it's kids that they're isolating for months. And the older people, sometimes for decades, so that their minds are just pudding, you know, and the private prisons that are doing everything that they can to cause recidivism, because they're being paid for the prisoners that they have. They have no interest in people coming out into society and contributing instead of taking away. And I don't see how I could let that pass knowing about it.
We appreciate your being there. Yesterday's event, in fact, was one of the better attended and more vocal events that we've had, so maybe we are getting some traction.
We're kind of proud of the fact, too, that Temple Bethel is definitely participating in that process.
Yeah. And of course, you're associated with Temple Bethel, a social justice champion, really, in a lot of respects. And I know that you've been working to have them support some different social justice initiatives in town.
Well, that is something that, you know, we could talk about too, and that is that ex-mayor Don Lane is proposing, and it's going to come up on February 24th, I think, he's going to propose amending the ordinance forbidding people to sleep so that people will be able to sleep, change that process, and include blanket, hopefully sleeping bags opportunity as well. And you, Steve, have been a big part of that process too. And I want to say before that, when you were talking about Mike and I, you've been such a great help to me in terms of something that we came up with, which preceded the Freedom Sleepers, which is called the Homeless Shelter Depot concept, which was still something that we have on our agenda. So I'm grateful to you for all the stuff you do.
Well, and it's interesting the kind of synergistic thing that happens. Mike, as a council member, you've been very supportive of the right to sleep. Just you've said on the record, people need to have a place to be. They need to have a place to sleep. And if there is any possibility of a revision of our camping sleeping ban, then we're going to have some idea of what that would look like, post passage of that particular amendment. And that's one of the things maybe that the Homeless Depot would be helpful in providing.
I'm hopeful that as a city and really as a whole society that we managed to squeak past the recession, and I think people are kind of looking around and thinking about, well, where are we at as a society? And you see that coming from the right wingers and looking at Donald Trump to take on a more radical agenda, and also from progressives saying, well, what's going on? And my hope is that here in Santa Cruz, one thing we do is we look at this issue of homelessness and we decide collectively that it can't be let be. We can't just keep blaming the very poor for not having homes and trying to push them from bush to bush. It's not a sensible policy, not just for them but for all the rest of us. I mean, I have people complaining all the time. Why is this person sleeping in front of my house? Why are they in the park? Well, because we haven't accepted responsibility for homelessness, and we don't have a system on how to deal with it. So, and part of the way that we've neglected responsibility for decades is by saying it's illegal to sleep, which is just a bad joke on all of us. I mean, and it's one of those things that drives me crazy because it erodes the authority of government. We say it's illegal to sleep, and then you go outside, there's people sleeping everywhere, willy-nilly. Why? Because human beings sleep. That's what we do.
And it makes them criminals besides.
Right. So it criminalizes them, and it makes a joke out of us as a city council. So, it's well past time that we rectify this situation. And Don's been sitting on this for 7 years, Mayor Lane, and I think he's finally said, look, we got to try. We can't just hang out with the status quo. That doesn't make any sense.
And as this proposed amendment kind of works its way around the community, and then there's a relatively large group of key organizers who are now going to begin to kind of articulate the reasons why excising the sleeping references in the camping ban is not only sound public policy, but it also really does go to the core idea of let's try to get some money for people to house them, and it affects our HUD funding, as you know. There's more to governance than simply passing laws. There's how do you pay for things, how do you fund things, and that's something that you know as much about as anyone.
Yeah, it's ultimately about being pragmatic. I mean, you can't make it illegal for people to sleep, and it hasn't worked. There's people sleeping, like I said, everywhere. You can make laws about how people treat each other, and we have lots of laws like that. There's, people are like, they urinated in public. Well, there's a law against that. He did drugs in front of me. There's a law against that. All the behaviors we don't like, there are laws against. And we're going to keep those laws when those are not an issue. But in the meantime, where do we expect people to be? Like, what is our social expectation when someone's in extreme poverty? And that's what we have to deal with. And I think being the son of a freedom rider, from the beginning, I've thought, this is something we have to solve. We can't just continue to scapegoat the victims.
Why do you? I'm curious, the two of you. Why do you think that people in Santa Cruz and other communities look away from the homeless? You mentioned that a second. I mean, why is it that society says this doesn't have anything to do with me?
I think people are afraid, and I think this really came up during the recession, which in a way was good because it got the issue out and people talk about it a lot, and now hopefully we're going to deal with it. But
afraid of the homeless?
Afraid of a couple things. One, that they might be homeless. I think that's especially why it occurred in the recession, because it was really scary and people were losing their homes all the time. And so unfortunately, as human beings, you know, we get afraid and then we want to blame someone or scapegoat someone. It's kind of a human characteristic.
Except for those that want to become more empathetic because they might.
Right, well, but you dealt with the South. There's certainly a lot of scapegoating going on, right? So, and then the other reason I think is that it really undermines this core belief we have in America that everyone can pull themselves up from their bootstraps and succeed in our society. But, you know, when you have 5%, 6% of your population is homeless, you really got to scratch your head and think, huh, maybe things are not, you know, maybe this just isn't true. And that's really hard for people. They really want to believe that. It's really core to our identity.
And I think my answer to that would be that there is a real fear in people, particularly during the recession, and I think it's really carried over, that they're a lot closer to being poor than they are to being rich. You know?
Which is true, unfortunately.
Yeah,
right?
unfortunately.
And there's obviously a certain amount of xenophobia, just fear of someone who's so different than they might be, the fear of the stranger and stuff like that. One of the great things about volunteering at like Food Not Bombs is, you know, look, I've been meeting a lot of homeless people, and you know, there's nothing to really be afraid of. It's,
you know, it's interesting that in the video that we didn't see all of the video of the young man downtown, that he was talking about his suggestion that they should have the city council meet with the homeless people themselves and discuss the problems, you know, and have a face-to-face. And that's one thing I admire about Micah, is that he has gone to the Homeless Services Center. He has gone to places where there are homeless people experiencing homelessness, and talked to them about their challenges, you know, and why we haven't had, you know, a particular summit of all the city council members sitting down in a room with, certainly you can't do all the homeless folks, but certainly a segment of them, it would be a good idea. But nevertheless, you've been there, you know, to hear their concerns, and there's a lot of respect that I have for that.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're just citizens, and I'm supposed to work for all the citizens. And it's not just a few, it's like 6% of the citizens are homeless, so I should be working for them as well.
Well, you know, and it's interesting, Phil, that you kind of, you know, contrast, or Micah contrasted when you were talking about, you know, well, why did people in the South feel so threatened by, you know, African Americans? You know? And maybe there's that thing about, you know, they represent a poor segment of society, a disenfranchised segment of society, and they don't want to be in that position of powerlessness. And they'd rather keep others there so that it empowers them in that way.
Well, I think that there may be a certain amount of racism against homeless people, but what we saw in the South, you know, was classic racism, meaning, you know, people were anti-African American because they were black. And of course, sad to say, we still see that in our society today.
Yeah. And when you were there as a freedom rider, did you get a sense that what you were doing was actually was changing the landscape, you know, changing the narrative of black-white relations in America?
Well, to be honest with you, in 1961, we didn't really see that because we were political prisoners, and we didn't really see that kind of process of change. But when we went back to the celebration 3 years ago in Jackson, my God, there were signs all over the city, welcome freedom riders, and people were kissing, black and white people were, you know, embracing us and thanking us for helping made the change that we saw. So yeah, I was myself taken back because I tend to kind of say, you know, no big deal, but it did make an impact.
And Louise, of course, you've been around this kind of passion and commitment, you know, that Phil shows us every day. How's that affected you as an activist?
Well, it's given me the opportunity to do what I would always like to have done anyway. I was down in Mexico, where I lived for a long time. I worked for poor children and for the community generally, you know, but to have a partner who does this with me, it has been really, really important to me.
Yeah. And yours really has been, I think, even to the casual observer, a real partnership in activism, because, you know, wherever Phil is, we see Phil downtown. We should mention your book, you know, if you like to mention, Phil has a book, wonderful book. You should mention that just in passing, as Phil is downtown. He's selling his book, and I see Phil, and he's talking to somebody, or he's, you know, discussing, you know, some
well, because it's a book on ethics.
And I said, Phil, how are you doing with your book? So I sold 3 or 4 or 11 or 12 or something like that. And I'm going, wow. You know.
Well, it is connected to social justice because it's a book on ethics, moral courage, forgiveness, righteousness, justice, empathy, and compassion. So it definitely impacts on what I'm doing downtown. And I get get a lot of kindness given to me by people who, like buy the book. So that's been super.
Mike, you think, and coming again from this tradition of activism, you live downtown. You live the downtown experience. You're not only a public servant, but you're there. You're riding your bike. You are interacting with people all the time. Does that make you a more effective advocate for them? Are you able to hear more of what their concerns are as you go around?
Well, I have 2 little daughters too, 5 and 10, and I think first of all it makes me a little, realistic. I mean, I never tell people like, oh, the homeless people are all wonderful, don't worry about it. It's just not true. And I think also I have a certain amount of respect from the police or other council members or whatever, because my daughters and I and my wife, we live there. So when people are complaining like, there was a homeless person I saw in my neighborhood. I'm like, well, yeah, someone slept in front of my house yesterday, but it was okay. I talked to them and they left. Whatever. It's like I'm not blind. I don't have blinders on. I don't have blinders on to the fact that our current situation is impossible either.
And I hasten to mention that the one person missing from this group is your wife, Akiko Manami, who is a fabulous activist in town. She was a member of the SCORE steering committee with me. We loved having her on the committee. She's still involved in helping us with caucusing and things of that kind. So shout out to Akiko for all the wonderful work that she does. And I was suggesting as we do the show that you bring Akiko on too, but you couldn't figure out who was going to take care of the kids when you're here. So somebody has to mind the store. So
I think you should have Akiko on. That'll be great. And I'll stay home with the kids.
Okay, well, the next show we do, we'll have her on. But, and kind of as, all of us look ahead to what we see happening, we have an understanding of kind of what's happened in the last year or two in Santa Cruz. There may be a change in policy or change in feeling about how people experiencing homelessness are being treated and coming up with more positive outcomes for them. But what do you see the future holding? In the next year or so, you'll be going toward a re-election campaign if you choose to run. And Phil and Louise, you'll be downtown doing what you do. But what do you see as the future in Santa Cruz, just in the feeling of equality and social justice?
Well, over the next year, we have a big challenge as a community. And as a city council especially, to make good on our promise to buy the Beach Flats Garden. And that's a fascinating issue. There's no bad guy, but there is a real pressure on us as a society to solve this, because we have these mostly disenfranchised people, older Latino men who don't have much money, who live in a rundown neighborhood. Which is almost entirely owned by the boardwalk.
Right.
And they've created this amazing oasis, this beautiful garden. And it's on land the boardwalk owns. The boardwalk donated it generously for 25 years, but we want to save it. I mean, the boardwalk wants the land back, but this is this classic sort of struggle between capital property rights and community rights and community joy and culture, agriculture, which is a type of culture. So the council got involved a few months ago and said, yes, we want to buy this garden. It was unanimous. I really appreciate the council members.
Indeed it was.
And but we haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah.
So that's going to be that's going to be a struggle. And I just keep pushing and hoping and praying and begging that everyone will come to the table, including the boardwalk, and that we'll resolve this and we'll save that garden.
And it just reflects, as far as I'm concerned, that no issue in town is created in isolation. They are all working together. When the Beach Flats Community Garden folks came to City Council, Freedom Sleepers were very supportive of them. We marched in their parades. We went out and supported them in every way that we can. And they, in turn, have been supportive, to a certain extent, of the things that we do. So we're kind of all of us social activists, in these things together and trying to move that needle a little bit more to the social justice side of things.
And
what do you see? Please.
Santa Cruz has a well-deserved reputation where, we stand up for people, above sort of status quo power. Like people in Santa Cruz, they want campaign finance reform, they want feminism, they want equality, they want the minimum wage. And so that's why I am confident that we will buy the Beach Flats Garden and that we'll solve this dilemma around homelessness. Because, if we work hard enough, the four of us and everyone else, and we help people really outline these issues where people can really understand, how their values relate to these policy decisions. And I think that people in Santa Cruz they have really good values, and we will overcome.
Yeah. Phil, you have any comments about what you think the future holds for us?
I'm fairly optimistic, in large part because one senses, you know more about this than I do in a way, that the courts are beginning to recognize that sleeping is a constitutional right, in effect. And, we saw this wonderful statement by the Justice Department
in Bellevue, Boise, indeed.
In that case, it was beautifully written, 15-page, beautifully emotional statement.
That's extremely well articulated.
Right, and I think, for example, while ex-Mayor Don has a wonderful sense of compassion, I think that he knows that if the city doesn't solve this problem, the courts may say to the city, look, you cannot forbid people the right to sleep, and you got to do something about it. So in that way, I'm a little bit optimistic, even though Louise and I were unsuccessful Thursday in convincing, Friday in convincing a local judge that sleeping, forbidding sleeping is unethical. And he said, but you were protesting sleeping, but you were arrested for trespassing. And we were trying to say, well, those two were connected, but he didn't see it. So hopefully society will see it more, though.
And Louise, for you?
Well, Brent Adams, is that his last name?
Yeah.
It has been very successful beginning an emergency shelter. Warming center. And some of the churches are cooperating.
Yeah, definitely.
The Calvary and Episcopal Church and the People's, the Quaker Meeting House and
Peace United,
Peace United,
Church of Christ, absolutely, yeah.
And the city has voted to give some nights in a city building, and it's only a start, but it is movement.
Right.
And I am encouraged to think that it will get better in the next year.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's whether or not we will be able to see the compassion that we obviously have, and it's been spoken of by so many, translated into action, translated into social action. I think we're fortunate. We mentioned the beautiful articulation from the statement of interest from the Justice Department in Bellevue, Boise. We're just as fortunate to have somebody like Don Lane who articulated the points that in support of a amendment to the camping ban, and everyone in the community who is listening to this show will at a certain point be able to read that, but we're fortunate to have that kind of articulation of what effective and sound public policy is. And you, as a council member, are concerned about sound public policy.
That's right. It should be able to knock on it. It should make sense.
Yeah.
I don't think the sleep ban passes that test.
Yeah.
But when we talk about public policy, I think public policy is also influenced by, wonderfully courageous leaders like Pastor Joel at Calvary. I mean, there's a guy who's really committed to helping people overcome their suffering. Yeah. And Reverend Dave at the
David Grimshaw Jones, the Peace United Church of Christ, absolutely.
These are clergy with a fair number of others that are saying we got
Reverend Herb Schmidt, Dr. Paul Lee, people really, I think, have come together right now, anyway, in support of this proposed amendment, which again, people will hear about. We don't have to talk about it, too awfully much, but. Again, I think that there is a sense of compassion in the community. There is a sense of moving, the needle a little bit more towards social justice and equality. And one thing I really must say, and that is that, Micah, you were mentioning that you're not afraid to be voted in the minority. And that's courageous to me because it raises the issues. When we went to council and we wanted safe sleeping spaces as proposed by the Homeless Depot or safe RV parking spaces, although those did not prevail, there was strong support from a council member about the sound public policy of that. And it raises the issue to where, people at some point may consider that to be something that they think is wise public policy.
Thank you.
It's a tough issue for you, too, because Micah has to wrestle with this issue of standing up and being the individualist, and at the same time working with his fellow council people. It's a fine line. And I remember when Micah was running for office, he said, I'm going to try to reflect my sense of what I view as ethically right. You know, at the same time, I know I'm going to work.
And I know that it hasn't been easy.
No, it hasn't been easy. And it's partly because I do respect the other council members. If I didn't care about them or respect them, it'd be easy. I would just vote no all the time, you know. But I mean, like, for example, Councilmember Comstock, that was elected partly by Take Back Santa Cruz, she led the charge to open the bathroom downtown 24 hours,
right.
you know. And so it's hard to, you know, when you see someone trying and someone reaching for, you know, to do the right thing, then it's hard to say, no, I disagree about that completely, you know. But I do sometimes, and I think it's part of democracy, and I think the other council members, you know, at some level understand it, that sometimes we just need to disagree publicly so that the community sees where we're at, and so we can try to work it out, you know, the next round or the round after that. One thing that the council's been struggling with, I think pretty successfully, is, and this is where sort of big ideology comes down to sort of nuts and bolts, is about how do we have more affordable housing in Santa Cruz, you know, because the reason, let's keep in mind, the reason we have homelessness is not because of some of these, you know, psychological theories we said about, you know, people, you know, they're scared or whatever. The reason we have homelessness is because our cost of housing is so high. I mean, that's why we have so many homeless in Santa Cruz. We're one of the highest cost of housing places to live in the country. So that's why people are homeless. They can't afford a house. No one wants to be homeless. Anyways, so we need to really figure out how to deal with this problem. Minimum wage is part of the solution, I think, and I'm going to work hard to make sure that passes at a state level in November. I think we'll have a chance to vote on it. But so is affordable housing. So, you know, I'm thinking maybe we need some kind of funding source. We might go to the voters and say, will you approve some kind of tax for us to use for affordable housing? We were using redevelopment money, but that's mostly gone away.
And that's, I think, how we all really work together, governmental and non-governmental organizations, is that I think there is a place for initiatives to provide fair and affordable housing for everybody who wants it. There is also a need for shelter, which Phil and I and Louisa, in fact, have worked on. And Dr. Paul Lee, you know, continues to say, you know, housing is a fine thing. Let's find a home for every homeless person who wants one. But what about the folks, the 1,000 folks who are waiting in line for their number to be called? What are we going to do? We can't forget them.
Especially right now when the government is emphasizing long-term placement and not emergency shelter.
Right. I mean, but just Tuesday, for the one little micro issue, because I love it when people try to pay attention to council, but on Tuesday there's a developer putting up a building on 555 Pacific, and they've requested the council that they pay a fee instead of providing the percentage of low-income housing they're supposed to provide. You know, and that's the kind of thing where we need to be involved as a community. I think we should be involved to say, no, you need to provide the housing.
Exactly.
It's right downtown. It's really small units. You know, but you know, the council wrestles with those kind of things and has all kinds of other ideas about, you know, how to use money for affordable housing or whatever. So these are the kind of, and if we let this developer do it, you can be sure other ones are going to ask for it. So, so that's the kind of issues where, you know, it's not as sort of dramatic as the, you know, as the sleeping ban, but it is important, and I hope the community does watch and get involved with the council and tell us what you think.
Yeah, Phil?
It definitely reflects a sense of social conscience on the part of on that issue that you just raised.
Yeah, I mean, all the council members care a lot about that, but it's like, well, how does it play out, and what are our priorities? You know, I mean, like, for example, like I said, all the council members vote to save the garden, but it's like, well, how do we do it? You know, like, how do we make that happen? So that's the challenge.
Yeah. Well, we have about a minute or so left in the program. This has been delightful. You know, I really wanted to have an opportunity for all of us to sit and talk, and for really the people in Santa Cruz to get to know you personally a little bit better. Certainly Mike has been a public figure for some time, and I think people know him and know his values and how they reflect the community values. But as a family, you know, you've really taken a very important place in Santa Cruz in terms of working for social justice, and the hope is that we can all, you know, work to that goal where there is true social justice in Santa Cruz. I know we will. But thank you again, Micah, for all of your good works, and if you decide you want to run for re-election, you know, you got my vote.
Awesome. That means a lot. Well, I'm not surprised, but it does mean a lot, because I have a lot of respect for you, Steve.
And Phil, thank you so much.
My vote too.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, Phil, and keep writing. We all enjoy your letters to the editor, your op-ed pieces when they're published, but just your presence around town. Whether you're selling your book or you're pedaling around or you're talking to people, you become a very important presence in Santa Cruz, giving people hope. And if we do nothing else day to day, I think that we can give some people hope that there is a better day to come. And Louisa, a pleasure talking to you about the things and issues that concern you. Again, I was really delighted to see you over at Council applying for the commission. I think you'd be a wonderful commissioner on what is a terrific commission for the prevention of violence against women. Thank you for being there with the solitary confinement events, and we look forward to seeing you again. We'll all be continuing our efforts individually to make Santa Cruz a better place and a more compassionate place, as Don Lane points out for everybody. So thank you so much for being here, and look forward to seeing you all again out doing the good work that we all like to do. Thank you so much for being here. And this has been Steve Plaich. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Voice from the Village. Join us again in a couple of weeks when we'll be talking about other issues that are facing challenging or just interesting to the people in Santa Cruz. Thanks so much for watching, and good night.